accompanying me here to Iowa. This is a wonderful place to be. But first, some thanks are in order. Mark and Barbie Miller have been gracious hosts while we're here, and Randy Davis, who's been good to commute us around this great state. It's good to be back in farm country. For those of you who don't know, I actually had ancestors passed through Iowa in the 1800s. I come from a farming background. I had farmers and ranchers in my extended family, and it kind of gave me the farming bug. So right out of West Point, when I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, my first duty station, I bought a farm. And that's kind of made me a little bit partial to a story told by, I'm sure, our favorite Californian, President Reagan. Related a story about a young farmer who bought this plot of land. It was a small plot that was full of rocks and trees and vegetation. And this guy spent a lot of time, actually weeks of blood, sweat, and tears clearing the land. And he finally got to a point where he could grow a small garden. And the produce from that garden just blew him away. I mean, it was incredible. He was so proud of that garden that one Sunday at church, he talked to his preacher and said, "Hey, preacher, come on over. Take a look at this garden." So the preacher came in over to the farmer's garden after church, took one look, and he was just as amazed as the farmer. He said, "Man, farmer, that is just an incredible, bountiful harvest that God has blessed you with." He walked through the rows of corn, through the rows of carrots, looked at the squash, and at every row he would have the same refrain. "Man, God has really blessed you. He's really given you this. He's blessed you with this bountiful harvest." Well, the farmer was getting increasingly disturbed with the preacher's antics. And finally, he just couldn't contain himself anymore and blurted out, "Well, pastor, you really should have seen this when God was doing it all by himself." Well, from the beginning, God has blessed this great land. And it's been through the blood, sweat, and tears of our founders and those who followed that we have become that bright, shining city on a hill. What do I mean by that? Well, we've spread democracy, representative government, we've spread free enterprise, the wonders of modern medicine, the advancement of agriculture to the world over. We brought many out from the world of darkness. But now, my friends, darkness is descending upon our land. I want to share with you a few statistics that shake us to our core. Make no mistake about it, we are living under a surveillance state. There have been a number of NSA whistleblowers who have recently disclosed that virtually every digital communication in this country is currently recorded. We had a whistleblower from the Bush administration say in June that there was actually phone surveillance over high-ranking military officials, political leaders, a Supreme Court justice who later identified this individual as Justice Alito, and even then Senate candidate Barack Obama in 2004. Whistleblower Snowden has offered even more meat to what's going on. By his allegations and others like him that have been employed by the clandestine agencies, we know that virtually everything that you do on the internet is being recorded by our clandestine agencies. In other words, every search that you make on the internet, every story that you read, every email that you send, every entry that you make in social media. In other words, although it might not be reviewed by NSA analysts or clandestine agency analysts, our government has built a dossier on each and every one of us. And my friends, with that, freedom cannot long survive. Another statistic relating to the middle class. Our middle class is under fire. I don't know how many know this, but since the last recession, only 45% of the net worth lost in that recession has been recovered by our middle class. Home ownership is now at an 18-year low. In many areas, it's getting worse. And get this, a study last year shows that median net worth in this country today is at a 43-year low. Income's not much better. Since the 1970s, and this is a bright spot, productivity has increased by 80% in this country. But the problem is, unlike past trends, productivity and compensation are not keeping hand-in-hand trends. Instead, what has happened, and I'm going to talk about the median compensation for male workers, it is actually stagnating. Since the mid-70s, there has been an increase in compensation for the male worker of 0.1%. Let me translate that. What that means is, from the mid-70s, the male worker making $10 an hour today is making $10.01. But here's another shocking figure, and it took my mind a little bit of time to wrap itself around this. But today, 40% of American workers are making less than the full-time minimum wage worker in 1968. That's an amazing statistic. And now, at the same time these things are happening to the middle-class wage earner, we're talking amnesty. It's another step to lowering American wages even more. In Alaska, we have a related phenomenon. It may not be prevalent here in Iowa, but it's called the Foreign Guest Worker Program. Alaska has a very high unemployment rate, especially in Native Alaskan populations, 20%. And yet we're importing thousands of workers annually to work in fish canning plants and the tourist industry. And what does it do? Well, it keeps that unemployment high and wages continue to go lower. Internationalism is advancing. Last year, we were within one senator of confirming the law of the sea treaty. It's a horrific giveaway of American sovereignty. Virtually the entirety of Alaska's state delegation, its governor, also its legislature are supportive of this treaty. And yet what does it do? First of all, it's 2/3 of the Earth's surface under the governance of an international body, and it's not just the oceans, mind you. It also subjects us to a taxation scheme that will enrich the United Nations. In addition to that, regulates American business, redistributes technology. It also imposes international controls on pollution and climate. It's not just a monumental giveaway of American sovereignty, it's also a massive concession to anti-American interests. The institution of marriage in this country is crumbling. In the 1960s, about 5% of all children were born in single-headed households. This year, it's over 40%. If the trends continue, we're going to be over 50%. A majority of children born in single-headed households in this particular decade. No culture has ever survived this type of catastrophic collapse of the family. None. Horrors of abortion, 56 million dead, 1 out of 4 American babies aborted. The birth rate of our native-born population, the indigenous population, doesn't even meet replacement rate at this time. There's a Time magazine story this week, the cover story entitled "The Children or the Child-Free Life." It suggests that without children, you can have it all. I think they probably should have interviewed my wife about that. But there's also been a dramatic reversal in societal attitudes toward homosexual marriage. We've all seen it. You can see it in the press. You can even, unfortunately, see it in some churches today. Back in 1996, you had 70% of all Americans, not just those that were Christian, but all Americans that were opposed to homosexual marriage. Today, that number has fallen to 45%. That's a complete reversal. It's no wonder that now a supermajority of Americans, 77%, say that religion is losing its influence in American culture. That's a staggering drop from 2001, when only 24% held that view. So how did we get there? How did we get to the point where we're at today? We are at war for the heart and soul of this country. And this war is not one of our choosing. This is a war that started over a century ago by the utopian states. It's a war that's now entered such an advanced stage that if we ignore it, it would be cultural and political suicide. The statists have successfully converted our schools from centers of learning to institutions of atheistic indoctrination. Religious pluralism and multiculturalism have imposed a new secular orthodoxy of moral relativism and political correctness, basically undercuts the free exchange of ideas. The importance of the individual has been supplanted by these vague notions of community and the greater good. The independent spirit that built America is being undermined, and as our dependency grows, we're swiftly no longer becoming able to govern ourselves. We cannot allow this to continue. My friends, individual liberty is exchanged for a false sense of security, private property, gladly traded for public works. It is with great sadness that I confess that our president's fundamental transformation of this nation has largely been a success. So the question is a familiar one to us. When the foundations are destroyed, what shall the just do? Well, now, more than ever, we must sound a clarion call to return to the Judeo-Christian foundations that have developed and made Western civilization. It is out of that soil that the civil ideas that have shaped America came, like monotheism, the contingency of creation, the idea that transcendent law and therefore natural rights and universal ethics, the importance of the individual and the value of each and every human life, libertarian freedom, linear history, and the concept of progress. In other words, the ideas that make self-government possible. While the secular fundamentalists of our age feverishly work to build a wall of separation between church and state, any religious sentiment for that matter, in our government, it's clear from history that no such intent was ever intended by our founders. On the contrary, the Declaration of Independence has 4 distinct and separate references to the Almighty God and His moral governance of the world. He is invoked as the lawgiver who built His decrees into the very fabric of creation. 2, the creator who endows all men with certain unalienable rights. 3, the supreme judge of the world, to whom our founders appealed for the rectitude of their intentions. And 4, the divine protector of their efforts. Far from being an antique relic of antiquity, not only was the concept of God the touchstone of the revolutionary mind, it continues to function in American law and jurisprudence as the guarantor of our most fundamental rights. The unique and crowning achievement of the American Revolution was the permanence, the society that was anchored in the permanence of transcendent law. Which is why, for example, unlike the legal constructs that we saw come out of revolutionary France, the American Constitution has outlived 4 such documents there. Enlightenment and the rule of reason alone have failed to deliver a liberal achievement like the American Constitution. While enlightenment and obviously common sense are necessary conditions of a free society, they are not sufficient. By undermining the foundations of this great experiment, secular fundamentalists, whatever their intentions, are giving birth to fertile ground for tyranny. Take, for example, Obamacare. With its contraception mandate on Catholic institutions, or perhaps the requirement that Christian employers provide insurance policies that supply abortion services. Same-sex marriage being forced upon clergy. Chaplains not being able to pray in the name of Jesus. Soldiers. Again, my son at West Point, I had prior service, I talked to military men and women all the time. Soldiers not being allowed to spread the gospel, except under threat of criminal sanction. Or perhaps the new Employment Non-Discrimination Act is being pushed right now through Congress. What would it do? It would force Christians to either stop the way they're doing business, abandon the public square, or violate their conscience. And just today I read a story about the O-Guards at Dick and Betty out of Grimes, Iowa. How many people heard about that story today? Well, these are Christian brethren of yours here in your state who are being required, or I should say, where there's a tremendous amount of pressure being put on them to host a homosexual marriage in their business premises. And right now they think they may have to shut it down because of that pressure. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and his allies are engaged in a form of systematic, spiritual, and religious apartheid. They seek to subjugate free conscience to progressive secular ideology. They want to remove God from the public discourse and drive people of faith into the closet of private worship. And that is in direct violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution that says Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Dostoevsky was right. Socialism is not merely the labor question, it is before all things the atheistic question. And if God is dead, all things are permissible. Besides the loss of the First Amendment rights, our wealth has been confiscated on a massive scale. From bailouts to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Wall Street, the big banks, even to fund the IMF bailouts in the failed states of Europe. But to make matters worse, our children's futures are being mortgaged to the Bank of China. It is immoral. And of course, now we've got the world's greatest healthcare system that's being taken over by a government that can't even keep track of its own affairs, let alone balance its own books. Crony capitalism threatens our electoral system in unprecedented ways, such as what we saw in Alaska in 2010, as big business and K Street interests buy elections and corrupt politicians so that they can line their own pockets with our money. But we've reached a point now where the nation-state, including capitalism, may be the least of our worries. Instead, the massive surveillance state has raised its ugly head, and we're told it's for our own good. C.S. Lewis stated so eloquently, of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, because they do so with the approval of their own conscience. If we are going to save this republic, we must return to American first principles. We must cultivate the institutions of civil society that have made this nation great: the churches, the schools, the families, the charitable institutions. And we must offer a moral vision of the nation that is both winsome and compelling. But if we would save the country, we must first save ourselves. The solution is bigger than politics and politicians. For too long, we have relied on the Republican Party. But my friends, the Republican Party has failed us. Now, don't get me wrong. I've been a proud Republican for most of my life. I believe in her platform. But the revival of the American spirit is not going to be had out of one of the two political parties. It is not going to be a top-down solution. It begins with you. It begins with me. We're in a time of great moral peril. Most of our politicians have been compromised. It's clear that a majority lack the courage to do what is right for the country, even though they are under a sworn oath to do so. It was 28 years ago that I entered the U.S. Army as a cadet at West Point, just like my son did, Jacob, last week. I entered the academy under this covenant. I, Joseph Miller, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. When we have a president who regularly flaunts the Constitution, when many in Congress, they deride patriots or vulgar epithets, when federal agencies and the formerly free press call military veterans and those who insist on constitutional oath-keeping terrorists, we can be sure that Washington has lost its faith in America. But here's the good news. Washington has never been the source of America's greatness. It is found in her people and in these troops. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, we live in times of great moral peril and upheaval, times that test men's souls. But we were made for these times. So this may yet be our finest hour. Like those intrepid people who stood in the face of the 18th century's greatest empire, we face a situation that is much bigger than ourselves. But I believe that we, the people, can and will rise to the occasion that is set before us. Major General Joseph Warren, who was a doctor for Abigail and John Adams, was one such patriot. He was one of the last men standing at Bunker Hill. At Bunker Hill, the Patriots ran out of ammo, and yet the British kept coming. Major General Joseph Warren was one of the last men standing there when he was felled by a cannon musket ball fired at close range by a British soldier. He was then decapitated and his head held aloft, brought to General Gage. Dr. Warren had earlier told the men of Massachusetts at Lexington this: "Our country is in danger now, but not to be despaired of. On you depend the fortunes of America. You are to decide the important questions upon which rests the happiness and liberty of millions not yet born. Act worthy of yourselves." Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a different age and with different challenges, perhaps a different remedy. But the stakes are just as high. Upon you and I rest the fortunes of America and the freedom of the world over. The future is in our hands. Let us act worthy of our trust. God bless you, and may God bless the United States.